This is a Sonor kit from 1980. I became a Sonor endorser in 1977. That's when I first started playing Sonor drums. And by 1980, I had visited the Sonor factory in Germany and had discussed with the people there a new kit that I wanted to take on tour with Journey. And this is the very kit that I used on tour in 1980 when we recorded the album Captured. And I didn't have it set up in this exact configuration. I had it set up with two 24-inch bass drums, I think a 12 and a 13 rack toms, and the 16 and 18-inch floor toms. So but it's the same drum set. And then I have a 20-inch bass drum with it. So this is the same drums, but set up in a configuration that I'm using with Vital Information right now. So the history of this kit is that I used it on that Journey Captured record. I also used it on the Escape album, which included the tune Don't Stop Believin'. And then I used the same kit with two 24-inch bass drums on the Frontiers record. And I think on Frontiers and Escape, I did have the 3 rack toms and 2 floor toms. I wasn't using 3 floor toms at that time. And when I recorded my first Vital Information record in January of 1983, I used this kit in a couple of different configurations. I used it with the 24-inch bass drum and I used it with the 20-inch bass drum. So I had some variety of sound depending on the song. And right now I'm on the 40th anniversary tour of Vital Information. So here we are in 2023, 40 years later. I have a new album called Time Flies with a brand new lineup for Vital Information. Yannick Guizdala on electric bass and Manuel Valera on the keyboards. And the Time Flies album is released on May 5th. So one thing to note, and in the 70s and the early part of the 80s, all Sonor drums were made, the shells were made out of beech. So there wasn't, this is before the day of like having all these choices. Do you want maple? Do you want birch? You know, all Sonor shells were beech. So these are beech shells, simply by, that's what they all were. Interesting, the tom configuration, 8-inch depth. So it was before they would change it. So when I did my 30th anniversary signature kit, I went for the same thing because I liked. So this is an 8x8. This is a 10x8 and a 12x8. So in those days, there weren't so many choices, but it's a beautiful configuration. And the same with the bass drum. All bass drums were 14 inches deep, whether it was a 24, 26, an 18, 20, 22, whatever it was. This is a 20 by 14. And for me, a 20 is, for playing jazz, rock, fusion, the 20-inch bass drum is a very good choice because it's a little bit bigger than the 18 when I'm playing something more rock, but it's not so big that I can play straight ahead on it, and it feels close to an 18. So it's a nice choice for playing both straight ahead, which I'm doing, and funk, rock type playing as well. So we have a 14 by 14, 16 by 16, and 18-inch head size, 18 by 16-inch depth. And these, I really love the sound, the tonal quality of these drums. They sound great whether they have clear heads, whether they have white heads, and in this case I've set them up with the black dot heads because it's a nice way to get sort of this medium-high tuning with a very defined fundamental, very clear melodic sound on the drums. And of course it's reminiscent of one of my drum heroes, Tony Williams, who had his drums set up like this, who I got to see him play with the Tony Williams, the new Tony Williams Lifetime with Alan Holdsworth, Alan Pasqua, and Tony Newton, which was a very influential band that I got to see 3 times in something like 1975, 1976. So this snare drum and this snare drum are both my Sonor signature snare drum. It's a very heavy metal shell, a steel shell. It's 5.5 by 14. And this one I have set up with just a regular white ambassador head, which isn't typical for me. Like, I like to use the coated diplomat, but in this case, I have this set up with the white coated ambassador. I've been playing it for something like 12 years, but it still sounds really great. This is a drum that I just used at Drumeo to record some things, and I have an actual calf head on it. It's a really interesting sound with the calf head. I pretty much have to tune it every day, and I still have my Sonor key from 1980, and that's what they used to look like in those days, with kind of a rubber key. And then this is a 12 by 5 side snare. So I'm using 3 different snares for just different colors, different tones, and different, in a way, melodies on the snares, because I use them for playing time, but I also use them for soloing. I've been playing Zildjian cymbals ever since I started drumming. I grew up in the area of just south of Boston, a little town called Whitman, Massachusetts, which was about 8 miles from the Zildjian factory. So of course I heard about Zildjian when I was quite young, and all of my cymbals in the early years were Zildjian, and I've continued to play them, for my lifetime. And what we have here is a cymbal called a high bell dry. It's a 22-inch high bell dry. It's got a lot of clarity and definition and a really nice kind of clangy sound when I hit it with this part of the stick, the shoulder of the stick. It doesn't build up, the tones that really don't build up. It's quite clear. This is a mini bell, It's a 22-inch mini bell, K mini bell with 3 rivets, and over here is a 21-inch staccato ride, which is a newer cymbal. Russ Miller helped develop this cymbal. Very clear cymbal. Like with all of these, they're pretty clear, very focused for riding and crashing. And if you notice, I don't have any crash cymbals. Well, let me just describe the hi-hats. They're 15-inch Avidus hats. So these are very reminiscent of the Zildjian cymbals from the 60s. Just, very kind of soft, mellow, kind of not too thick, pretty thin cymbal, which feels really great for me to play, either, with the stick or with the foot closing the hi-hats. So my idea with especially playing in an environment that is largely acoustic. I'm playing with an acoustic piano player and electric bass. Yannick plays electric bass, but sometimes I'm on stage with an acoustic bass player. So one of the ideas is I don't want to overpower the instrumentalist with sound. And one way to do that is if I played loud, clangy cymbals that had a lot of buildup. And these cymbals they're more subdued. And if I need a crash, I'll just crash on the ride, and it'll crash for a second and then diminish. Versus a crash cymbal, which can be annoying in a situation like this. I would use a crash cymbal with a big band. I'd use crash cymbals with a rock band, but in a more or less acoustic environment, I don't really like to use a crash cymbal. But as you can see, one of the things I am using is I'm using my 34-inch Zildjian gong. So I've incorporated the gong into the setup, and I'm playing it like a gigantic ride cymbal, really. It's like I've come up with ways of playing this where, I can get a nice tones out of it. Without it being overpowering, just a very interesting color to add to the overall sound of the drum set. And just to talk a little bit more about the overall level, is like the other reason I'm not so keen on using crash cymbals in this kind of environment is I mix my own drums acoustically just by my inner balance. Like I play the bass drum exactly the level that I want to hear it as related to the snare. I'll play the snare at the right level that I want to hear it as related to the toms, to the cymbals. So as you can see, miking wise, really we have very minimal miking. So we just have 3 mics essentially to pick up the overall kit, not cymbals. You know, no tom mics. These overhead mics are picking up the sound of the toms and the cymbals. There is a snare drum mic up mainly for when I'm playing brushes, if that sound needs to come up. And then there's a mic in front of the bass drum. But I'm in control of the overall dynamics. In this situation, we don't have mics on these side snares. So even though we have an electric bass, Yannick is sensitive in his levels because he's playing with an acoustic piano and an acoustic drum set, and he can regulate his level. So that's a key to having dynamic versatility, is to tune yourself to what it's like to play with acoustic instruments. For instance, most of the time I'm playing in New York in Birdland, for instance, with a saxophone player, a trumpet player, acoustic piano, and acoustic bass. So I regulate my overall sound to not overpower those musicians. And if there is a guitar player, it's usually a guitar player that's sensitized to how to blend with acoustic players. So this is a kind of a radical concept if you're used to only playing with electric players, electric bass, electric guitar, electric keyboards, where they can just simply turn up and play as loud as they want. And then sometimes the drummer, for survival, ends up playing loud and developing the habit of playing loud. I've broken that habit of always playing loud that I used to have when I was with Journey in the early days. And so even now, when I played with Journey from 2016 to 2019, I played with this same kind of integrity that I'm talking about. And I don't go for volume, I go for sound and balance. So I get the drum set to be balanced correctly from my perspective, and then I get the volume is only necessary enough to get the biggest sound that I want out of the kit, and then I let all the mics do the work to transfer that sound to the audience. With all the cymbals, I like to set them up on the sim pads. I find that the sim pads are a great system for having the cymbals feel very secure, and I like how they resonate with the sim pads. Sim pads are something that I always take on tour with me, especially overseas when I'm using some lone drums, and they invariably show up with really messed up cymbal felts. And so they're kind of a lifesaver for that. But I always set up my own kits with these sim pads. Heads, I'm using Remo heads. I've been playing Remo heads ever since I started playing. And I'm using pedals by DW. Bass drum pedal and the hi-hat pedal are from DW. Again, I've been playing those pedals for a long, long time. I have a very basic DW 5000, the original, looks like the original with the little skinny sprocket and the little skinny chain, and the very light footboard and a felt beater, which I find gives me a nice beefy low end from the bass drum. My sticks, the Vic Firth signature model, Steve Smith's signature model. Brushes are the Vic Firth Heritage brush, and the Zildjian gong mallet. I'd like to congratulate Zildjian for 400 years of cymbal mastery. And I'm thrilled with my Zildjian cymbals. Every time they come out with something new, I usually end up incorporating that into my setup. And then I still have some of my favorites here that I've been playing for quite a long time. So congratulations on 400 years. And for DW, that's amazing, 50 years. And I started playing that DW pedal pretty much shortly after it came out. So I'm honored to be associated with the DW bass drum pedal for all these years. Congratulations on 50 years.